Welcome to chapter 3, and now we're going to continue learning the present tense affirmative verbal forms. So negation is coming soon enough. After having previously just looked at the whole verbal system in general, the conjugation classes, and the third person forms, now we're getting the first and second person singular forms. Next week, we're going to complete the present tense paradigm. So we have the endings of the first and the second person, depending on the conjugation class. They are am at in the first conjugation and em et in the second conjugation. These endings are especially important because they are oftentimes used to indicate the conjugation class in lexical materials, reference materials on Mari. Since the infinitive doesn't tell you the conjugation class, you'll have the ending of the first person singular following the Greco-Roman tradition. Because that's how Greek and Latin dictionaries do this, showing you what the ending of the first person singular is, and then you know the conjugation class. Yeah, and once again, we're looking at things that might be perceived as irregularities if you haven't quite gotten a grip of the orthography, but that if you understand the orthography, you will see when you look at the transcriptions also, there's nothing irregular going on here. These are just the mechanisms of the orthography. We have another look at to be in the copulative sense, like Anne is a doctor, but now we're also looking at other persons, and we will see that in other persons you do need a form of to be, which is then ulash in the present tense, and it's a first conjugation class verb that is inflected fairly regularly. Moi journaliste ulam, I am a journalist. Okay, so skipping the copula, at least in standard language, is only permissible in the third person singular. Younger speakers might drop the copula everywhere in the present tense under Russian influence, because Russian doesn't use a copula in the present tense. So we look at the illative case, which marks movement into something. The formation of the illative case is fairly similar to the formation of the inessive case. So if you which we already looked at chapter 1, so it's not that shocking. We look at the formation of the how possessive suffixes first person, second person singular, em and et are attached to different stems. The mechanisms are a bit different than those, for example, surrounding how the accusative suffix is attached to stems. And we then actually, in the full form video, we actually discussed these different types of these different manners in which different suffixes attach to stems. The good news is that even though it's a bit tricky at first now to learn how these suffixes attach to the stems, it's only tricky at first because eventually you can, by analogy, know how to attach a stem to the attached suffix to the stem. For example, possessive suffix first person singular em and possessive suffix second person singular et, and the lative ending esh, which we're learning much later, they are all attached to the stem in exactly the same manner. So once you can do the possessive suffix first person singular, you can also do the second person singular, you can also do the lative. And we go through we compare these two suffixes here and look at how the suffixes are homonymous in some cases, but not always. Same if we compare the possessive suffix second person singular et with the clitic at, meaning and also, where they also are, these two endings are sometimes the same, but not always. And likewise, if we have the genitive n and the derivational suffix an, which we looked at last week, having with like rain, rainy, here also the forms, they are sometimes the same, but not always the same. Yeah. And here a reference to the learner's grammar of Mari, where we in the first chapter have an overview of what we are calling in the learner's grammar the suffix types, that basically every suffix in Mari morphology can be assigned to one of these categories, and then the formation of the linking to the stem is the same for all suffixes belonging to one of these groups. Yeah, still working with possessive suffixes, we look at kinship terms, where some kinship terms have irregular forms of possessive suffixes, like venge, son-in-law, where the regular form might be vengem, my son-in-law. You also have the irregular form vengem. But the regular forms, they are permissible. You can use them. You just should also be aware of these irregular forms that only some very few kinship terms have. Now, we look at pronouns, specifically personal pronouns, specifically the fact that we don't have to actually use them more as a pro-drop language. So pronoun use are generally only used when they are necessitated for either emphasis or other reasons. Like if you say, where do you live? Kushtuilet, where you would generally not use the personal pronoun tui, you. But if I'm talking about like contrastive in a way, if I say, I live in Vienna, so where do you live? I'd say, Vienna ste ilem, a kushtuilet, tui kushtuilet. Yeah. So words and word usage, what have we got in this chapter? Yeah, well, kinship terminology, we look at it in a bit more detail. Here you see the core family members, the ones that you should really learn, where you have here husband, wife, children, grandparents, parents, and siblings. But what is critical with the siblings is you have something in Mari called relative age distinction. You have separate words for brothers and sisters, depending on if they are younger or older for you. Isa is an older and only an older brother. Sholyo is a younger and only a younger brother. The kinship system as a whole gets a lot more complicated. Here you have a more complex overview, a more detailed overview from the textbook. Don't worry at this point if you find this daunting. Eventually you should become aware of all of these terms, but for now it suffices if you actively learn the core relatives that you see on this smaller overview here. Yeah, and I gave you some bonus terms here. Pelash is a spouse, gender neutral. Tang is a romantic partner, also gender neutral, boyfriend, girlfriend, etc. And Tita Nela Yodish, it's complicated. It's a difficult question when Maris ask you about your family status, your romantic status, and if you go to Marielle, they will. Yeah, here an overview of the some of the most important kinship terms with the so-called vocative forms. So if you have, for example, mother, ava, you also have a vocative form, avai, and avi, used when addressing her. But they're not just used when addressing someone. They are used as normal nouns that are just more personable in a way. So ava is like mother and avai is more like mom, sort of. And you can also like use, just as you can use mom when addressing your mother, you can also use it in reference, a third person reference to your mother. So, and then if you use it like that, it can be inflected further. So you could have like acha, father, acham, my father, achaman, my father. So my father is an adjunctive. If you have achai, dad, you can have achayem, my dad, and you can have achayemen, my dad's, etc. So in that sense, vocative, we don't treat it as part of as a grammatical case for two reasons. One is you only have these vocative forms for very few kinship terms. That's the first reason. The second one, it's actually more derivational than anything else. You form a new noun with this ending, the y attached to an a. Yeah. So here you have some other kinship terms. So these the kinship terms that have the vocatives in y, they all end in a, with the exception of chuchu, uncle, mother's younger brother, which ends in an u. Kinship terms that don't end in a stressed vowel do not form these vocative forms. So if you have vate, the vocative form is vatem, which is actually just my wife. One exception to this rule I just said is unika, Russian borrowing, goes from Russian vnuka. That also doesn't form the vocative forms in yeah. So yeah, here you have just the vocative forms of the possessive forms. Be careful at the bottom here when you have ergem or chuchunyum, or here sheshgem. These are the irregular possessive forms that we were discussing on an Oreo slide. Yeah, something to keep in mind. If Mari is your first language of the region you're learning, This is a new thing to learn. If you already know Russian or Finnish or Estonian or anything like that, this is not going to be very shocking. Or French, you have politeness distinctions in Mari. You have tui, which is you only addressing one person with whom you are on familiar term. If you are addressing somebody formally, or if you're addressing several people, you have plural forms. We discuss it in more detail in the long form recording, but yeah, it's the usual system of the region. We meet the form lige, which is basically may be. So Paul Kitche is a good day, and a Paul Kitche lige is, if I want to say, hey, good day, it's literally, it is may it be a good day. So much later we're going to meet the imperative, and like much later we're going to meet imperative in the third person, which is, if you know Baltic Finnic languages, you'll know this. For example, a lot of Uralic languages, like in Estonian, you'd have from olema to be, you'd have olgu, may he, she, they be. In Mari, this is then lige, li being a stem, meaning to become or to be, and it's the regular third person singular imperative form. Yeah, we have a quick look at reduplication, where we have we can have like erken is slowly, and erken is sort of more intensive form, like, oh, slowly, which is also the standard reply if somebody asks you how you're doing, and you want to say like, it's fine. If you don't want to go into detail, you just say, erken, slowly. We have a look at the clitic at, which we already mentioned before, which means and also, sometimes also neither. It has a wide range of usages, which we will become acquainted with over the course of the textbook. If you know Finnish, it is somewhat similar to Finnish kin or can. If you know Hungarian, it's somewhat similar to ish. So it's called an additive particle, and a lot of stuff, a lot of languages of the wider region have something like this. We look again at que, who, which is used in Mari not only to ask who somebody is by name, but also what somebody does. So if I already know that Ichan is a person with the name Ichan, and I ask Ichan que, who's Ichan, literally I'm asking, what I'm actually asking is, what is he by profession? We look at kayash, koshtash, to go. Both of these verbs mean to go, but while kaya denotes a unidirectional movement going from X to Y, koshtash denotes going somewhere and coming back, like going somewhere regularly, habitually. Many languages of the region have such distinctions in some shape or form, be they Finnish or Russian or Hungarian also has such a distinction. In the text, we meet the newest, the oldest member of the Sapaya family. We meet Kocha, who's coming to for a visit, and now we have a dialogue, because now we can also form first person singular and second person singular forms. Yeah, and once you're done with the text, you can also work through the exercises. You can watch us work through some of the exercises, and then you can have a look at the song of the week, which this week is Oshvisvis, White Chamomile, and it is critically, it's a Chuvash song, actually, that was borrowed into Mari. And this happens a lot in the region, that the different peoples of the region borrow melodies from one another and write their new lyrics. So in accompanying the song of the week, I've also given you a link to one Tatar, one Udmurt, and one Chuvash song. So you can just see the musical traditions of the region and see the similarities in stage music in the region. Okay, so see you next week in chapter 4.